The Courtship of Princess Leia by Dave Wolverton was released in April of 1994, a mere 2 months after the first book in the Jedi Academy trilogy, Jedi Search by Anderson, was released. Now, a little bit of not so much facts, but speculation. Dave Wolverton was originally signed for a trilogy, but obviously The Courtship of Princess Leia is a single book. So from the many plot threads running through the book, it's been suggested that the book we have as it is sort of a conglomeration of all the plot threads that were going to be addressed in 3 books. It also did not do quite as good sales-wise as some of the previous Star Wars books had done. Compared to Heir to the Empire's amazing 19-week run on the New York Times bestseller list, Courtship of Princess Leia was only on the list for 3 weeks, and the highest it made it was to number 7. So we have an interesting situation. The hardcover cover art features Princess Leia in a wedding dress, a very Blade Runner-esque Han, as well as a very Fabio-esque Isolde. But by the time the paperback rolled around, we have a much more action-oriented cover with the trio in their Endor garb and a Rancor and some AT-ATs. So what happened here? Again, speculation is that people mistook The Courtship of Princess Leia for a romance novel based on the wedding dress cover, and Lucasfilm basically wanted to make sure that they knew, no, this is action, this is adventure, and thus the brand new cover for the paperback book, something which most of the 90s era Bantam books don't do. The paperback is just a smaller version of the hardcover cover art. So, romance novels have been rather misaligned, mostly because of some very horrific examples. But basically, at their core, a romance novel is about the relationship or the romantic love between 2 individuals. So, The Courtship of Princess Leia, is it mostly about the relationship between Leia and Han? Yes. Is there a happily ever after? Yeah, pretty much. So, could you call it a romance novel? I would say, yeah, you sort of could. It mostly focuses on Han and Leia's romance, and that's the main gist of the plot. But then the key question, is it a good romance novel? And the answer is no. So my recollections of this book, I reread it about 10 years ago, did not enjoy it, wrote a pretty scathing Goodreads review, and it was interesting to see 10 years later if I still felt the same way. The answer was, yeah, I pretty much still felt the same way. And there weren't really any surprises for me in the book. I remembered most of the main plot points, and so when they came, it wasn't a revelation or anything like that. However, I do have to say on the Princess Leia costume count, Wolverton is doing really well. He's actually pretty good about describing everyone's costumes, not just Leia's. She has fancy dresses, she wears military clothes, and then once they end on Dathomir, she's dressed like one of the Dathomiri witches. So I may not like all the outfits described and may think some of them sound weird, but you know, they're there. Outfit descriptions are there. That's all I wanted, so good. So a brief summary. Han Solo returns from, presumably, he believes, destroying Warlord Zinj's flagship, the Iron Fist, only to find that a giant fleet of Hapan ships have arrived on Coruscant, wanting to make a peace treaty with Princess Leia. The problem is that they have all these gifts for her, and they want her to accept all their gifts and marry their crown prince. Han is very upset. Leia is, for some reason, seriously considering this arrangement, so he wins a planet in a card game, then kidnaps her and goes off to his newly won planet, only to find that it is right smack dab in the middle of Zinj's territory. Luke has been doing Jedi research, and he teams up with a soldier, and they go chasing off after Leia and Han. Everyone crash lands on Dathomir, and we find that the bad guys, the Night Sisters, are working hand in hand with Zinj, and our good guys, team up with the Dathomiri good guys, the witches. So, the characters. Han and Leia's relationship is both strange and strained in this book. At this point, they've been basically together for 4 years. Han is still a general in the New Republic Navy, and he's been off fighting Warlord Zinj while Leia's been off being a diplomat, so they haven't had a lot of time together. But their relationship is so strained from the start that this possible marriage with a soldier just makes things worse in an unbelievable manner. Han is ridiculously jealous. Han is insulting to a soldier, who, to be fair, is insulting right back. I can understand Leia viewing this from the strategic angle, or this would work really well for the New Republic. We would have all these ships, we would have this powerful ally. But Leia doesn't really approach the proposal that way. Instead, it's all that, oh, a soldier, he's so dreamy, he's so handsome, I think I'm falling in love with him. I don't know, it's so weird. It's almost as though Wolverton looked at my favorite movie, Empire Strikes Back, and all he took out of it was that Han and Leia bicker. But at this point in the story, and at this point in their relationship, is it really realistic that they would bicker to this extent? And I don't think they would. Leia's snappish and mean, and Han's jealous and mopey, and it's just weird. It's just weird. Luke is also not quite himself. Very much in keeping with how he behaved in Jedi Search, he's much more remote and not human than he has been in previous books and in the movies. It's almost as though Wolverton takes the idea that he's a Jedi and doesn't think of how his personality would mesh with that. He's trying to teach a soldier, they pick up Tenennial Doe, and he's trying to teach her, and in here, Isolder has no force capabilities. I don't know why you would try to teach him anything. And Luke's powers are off the chart. He makes himself look like he's dead. He floats down to the surface of Dathomir. He floats Isolder's ship and Isolder and R2 down as well. He just does crazy, amazing Superman feats that I feel like at this point in the story, how does he know how to do this? It culminates in him facing off against the head Night Sister Jazarian, and she ruptures all the blood vessels in his head, but he doesn't die. He takes the force from all the life around him and heals himself, and then he's flying the Falcon in an amazing way and taking out ships and taking out the satellites of the orbital night cloak, but we'll get to that. And it's just so beyond anything we've seen him do that he does feel like a pod person and not himself. The bad guys in this are, we've got Ta Shum, who's the queen mother of Hapes, and she's really interesting, but she's barely in it. All we know of her is that she's beautiful and she's scheming and she tries to kill Leia and Luke at 2 different points, and she's trying to control her child's life. Zinj is just there. We don't really see him. He's supposedly really smart, but we don't see any evidence of him being smart in that he teams up with these like homicidal evil force witches. And his plan, the orbital night cloak. On one hand, I don't understand how this would work at all. It's apparently a series of satellites that would block out the light, which I feel like you would need an awful lot, and they'd have to be awful big to do that, but whatever. I'm not going to get into logistics. My problem with passing Zinj off as this great, strategic force, yet the New Republic has been fighting for so long and they don't know how they would defeat him without, allying with someone like Hapes. is that his ideas are stupid. The orbital night cloak is like old-timey Christmas lights. If you knock out one or two, you knock out the whole system. Obviously, this would only work on a world where they just don't have ships and have no capability to take this out, but it's so stupid. And while it's in effect, it's essentially like a cloaking device. So all the ships on the inside of the orbital cloak like can't be sensed by the ships on the outside. So they could be running around causing mayhem and he has no way of knowing. I feel like there's a reason that in the Race Squadron books, Aaron Alston retcon Zinj, and it's because as he exists right now, he's just a moron. Dathomir itself sort of ties into the sense I get that Wolverton has created a really interesting world, but there are some weird aspects of it, and as a whole, it just doesn't feel very Star Wars to me. So first, let's look at the Hapan culture. It's a cluster of 63 systems, or stars, and they were originally pirates, and they're super wealthy, and they're super powerful, and they're ruled by these ruling queen mothers. So it's really cool seeing this matriarchal society, and likewise Dathomir, when we get there, is also a matriarchal society, but they're just so unbelievably barbaric that they feel wrong. You can't root for ladies being in power when they're always killing people and taking slaves and assassinating their own family members. And that's another issue I have with both Hapes and Dathomir. They're just full of these incredibly beautiful people. The Queen Mother is beautiful. Isolde is like Space Fabio. Tenennial's like 18 and gorgeous. So many of the people we encounter are beautiful that it starts to feel sort of sleazy. There's one scene where Tenennial has decided that she's taking Isolde as her slave husband, whatever, and she's presenting him to all the other witches of her clan. And there's a line about how they were making noise and appraising him like he was a stripper. This is very PG rated sexuality, but it just feels weird for the 90s era novels. It's like female empowerment, but female empowerment viewed through the male heterosexual gaze, which just comes off feeling strangely kinky, but not in a good way. And these barbaric matriarchal cultures, Hapes and Dathomir, seem to only exist so that they can be brought into the New Republic and tamed, domesticated, the savage parts done away with, which also strikes me as weird. Another un-Star Wars part is just like the technology we encounter. The Hapan ships are cool, but they're literally flying saucers, which just pulls you out of the story. And I feel the most egregious example of this is the Hapan Gun of Command. One of the gifts that the Hapans give Leia is this gun of command that apparently if you shoot someone with it, it like overpowers their will and you can make them do whatever you want. Even if you told them to kill themselves, they would kill themselves, which is horrifying. And the fact that this is the only time we encounter it and we never encounter it again, I would think that something like that would be so overpowered and such a game changer that just everyone would be trying to get their hands on it. But apparently we just see it here, we never see it again, so whatever. Han, however, does get his hands on one, the one that was gifted to Leia, and that he uses that to kidnap Leia and take her to the planet that he has won in his card game. There are just so many issues with that. The fact that we have Han Solo kidnapping against her will, literally brainwashing Leia. Understandably, she's mad about it, but I just don't see Han ever doing anything like that. And then just the fact that this technology exists, I don't want to talk about it. In the same way, the Witches of Dathomir are an interesting concept. They're Force-sensitive individuals, but they use the Force in a very different way. They speak spells, and Tenennial Doe is, in a way, almost like a weather witch, that she can create winds and stuff. which I think in any other book I would find a really cool concept, but it just seems so outside of what we know of the Force and what we know of Star Wars that it bothers me in the same way. It just feels like something out of a completely different novel. And maybe my opinion of this would change if this was something that was used more frequently in the books that came afterwards, but like Hades and Dathomir, we've got one Dathomiri witch who joins Luke's Jedi Academy, and then we've got Tenennial Doe and Isolde's daughter who shows up in later books, but like so many of these books, people come up with their darlings and bring their darlings, and then the next writers have new darlings, and we forget about the previous stuff they've come up with. And the witches are depicted as so unbelievably powerful, especially the Night Sisters. We hear that Palpatine was afraid of them, which just feels so bogus to me. Like, this is the man that pretty much single-handedly destroyed the Jedi Order. If he knew that there were a bunch of Force-sensitive people on a planet, he would probably try to subjugate them. He wouldn't just leave them alone. I can't forget two final issues that I have here. Number one is that for some reason, 3PO is constantly sucking up to Han. Why? And he gossips with a computer and finds out that Han is the descendant of the King of Corellia, and he writes a song about it, and he's got background music. That part is actually no joke. I sort of loved it, but it is awful. Only for it to turn out that Han is descended from a pretender to the throne, which just seems there to make this conflict, or like, oh, maybe Han can measure up to Isolde, but it's garbage. It's garbage. I hate that plot line. Another throwaway part at the end I hate is that Luke almost misses his sister's wedding. It's this little joke about how he accidentally went to the Alderaanian consulate instead of the Alderanian consulate, and so he just gets there in the nick of time, but Leia's like, oh, well, at least you're here, Luke. No, that's garbage. Luke is her only living family member. He would have been there 2 hours before the ceremony started. He would have been seating everyone. He would have been an usher. He probably would have given her away. He would not have walked in almost before the ceremony was done. That's garbage, Wolverton. It's garbage. So, to sum it up, The Courtship of Princess Leia has some cool concepts, introduces some characters that, in their own way, will become important in later books, not as themselves, but because they are the parents of a very important character. But at the same time, a lot of the things in the book strike me as unfitting with the Star Wars universe as it existed at this time and just feel foreign. I think if they were in a completely novel, non-Star Wars story, I would have enjoyed them a lot more, but as it was, I didn't like it. I didn't like how it portrayed our original three. I didn't like how it portrayed the cultures we encountered. And I'm just so sad that Leia and Han's wedding was such a weird book, all in all. So next week, I'm diving back into the Jedi Academy trilogy with the second book, Dark Apprentice by Kevin J. Anderson.